In less than 2 weeks, billions of dollars vanished from the global oil market. Not because the oil was gone, but because it couldn't move. It was still there, pumped from the ground, stored in tanks, loaded onto ships, and yet, it couldn't be sold. For the first time in decades, an oil nation had everything it needed, and no way to use it. And in a system like this, that's not supposed to happen. Because when oil stops moving, the world reacts instantly. Prices surge, markets panic, governments scramble. Everyone feels it. But this time, something was different. The oil stopped, and the world didn't. It adjusted, quietly, almost effortlessly. And that's what made this moment so dangerous. Then because it revealed something no one expected. The most important oil route on Earth might not be necessary anymore. Out at sea, the image didn't match the reality. Dozens of massive tankers just sitting still. Engines silent. Cargo full. Waiting. Not for weather, not for orders. For a system that had stopped working. Like a traffic jam stretching across the ocean. With no exit. And inside those ships, millions of barrels of oil with nowhere to go. Ports filled, storage tanks reached their limits, and pressure began to build. Slowly at first, then all at once. Because in a system built on movement, the moment things stop, everything starts to break. But here's what no one saw coming. This wasn't caused by war. There were no explosions, no invasion force, no single moment you could point to and say, that's when it happened. On just a quiet shift that cut the system off at its core. Completely. And while one country was being locked in, the rest of the world was already finding a way around it. So what really happened here? How does a country with everything it needs lose the ability to use it? For decades, this system worked perfectly. That was the problem, because the more reliable it became, the more the world depended on it. And that dependence created something powerful. A single narrow corridor, crowded with tankers, moving in endless lines, carrying nearly a fifth of the world's oil, day after day, night after night, always moving, always flowing. And because it never stopped, people stopped questioning it. Markets adjusted around it, governments planned around it. Entire economies were built on the assumption that it would always be there, that it had to be. And over time, that assumption turned into leverage. Because if one path carries everything, then threatening that path means threatening everything. You don't need to act. You don't need to block it. You just need the world to believe that you can. That belief became the real power. And for years, it worked. Every tension in the region, every headline, every small disruption sent signals through the global market. Prices moved, decisions changed, leaders paid attention, all because of one idea. If this route ever stops, the world doesn't just feel it, it breaks. But here's the part no one wanted to admit. That power only exists as long as there is no alternative. And quietly, far from the headlines, that condition was beginning to change. New pipelines were expanding. Other routes were being tested. Suppliers outside the region were increasing their reach. Not enough to replace everything. Not yet. But enough to weaken the assumption. Enough to introduce doubt. Because once the world realizes it has options, control starts to slip. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, almost invisibly. Until one day, the system everyone trusted is no longer the only system that works. And when that happens, the balance doesn't hold. It shifts. The moment movement slows in oil, loss doesn't come later. It comes immediately. And at first, nothing looked broken. That was the trap. Production continued. Pipelines still carried pressure. Tankers were still out at sea. From a distance, the system was intact. But then something shifted. Quietly, Routes began stretching longer. Schedules stopped lining up. Delays started stacking, faster than expected. Hours became days. Days became uncertainty. And uncertainty began turning into pressure. Not visible pressure, system pressure. Because in oil, timing is everything. And once timing slips, the entire chain starts to destabilize. Not supply, not demand, movement. That's where it broke. Tankers started waiting outside ports, waiting for clearance, waiting for insurance, waiting for decisions that weren't coming. At first, it felt temporary. It always does, until it isn't. Because once ships stop like this, they don't start again quickly. And suddenly, dozens of massive tankers were no longer moving at all. Engines silent, cargo full, crews watching the horizon, like a traffic jam stretching across the ocean. Only this time, nothing was clearing it. And inside those ships, millions of barrels of oil with nowhere to go. That's when the losses accelerated, not gradually, all at once. Billions began disappearing in real time, not because the oil was gone, but because it was trapped. And trapped value is the most dangerous kind, because it exists, but cannot be used, cannot be sold, cannot be moved. And in a system built entirely on flow, that is the point of no return. Because the system was never designed to stop. It was designed to move, constantly, continuously, without interruption. And once that movement fails, everything built on top of it starts to collapse, faster than anyone expected. But even then, one belief still held everything together. There's always a way out. Another route, another port, another option. There has to be. And for a moment, it still felt true. And this is where the system stopped working. Not gradually, not in a way you could fix. It locked. There was still oil. That wasn't the problem. The problem was, there was nowhere left to put it. Storage filled first, slowly at the beginning, then faster than anyone expected. Tank after tank reaching capacity, each one removing another option. Because once storage fills, the system doesn't bend. It breaks. Oil keeps coming out of the ground. It doesn't wait. It doesn't pause. It builds. Pressure rises. Decisions become limited until there is only one choice left. You shut it down. Production begins to slow. Then, almost overnight, it starts to stop. Not because anyone wanted it to, because there was no alternative. And once production stops like this, it doesn't come back the same. Some wells lose pressure, some lose output, some never fully recover. This is not delay. This is loss. Permanent. Future supply erased before it even reaches the market. Years of capacity. Reduced in days. And just like that, the crisis is no longer about the present. It starts consuming the future. Out at sea, the image only became more surreal. More ships arriving, none leaving. Massive tankers sitting still, stacked across the water like motionless steel. Routes no longer routes. Ports no longer exits. Everything feeding into the same point, with nowhere to go. The system didn't explode. It locked. And once a system like this locks, it doesn't unlock quickly, because every part depends on the other. Production depends on storage. Storage depends on transport. Transport depends on access. Remove one, and everything collapses with it. This was no longer a disruption. It was a chain reaction, already in motion, already past the point where it could be reversed easily. And still, one expectation remained. If something this big is breaking, the world has to feel it. Prices should surge. Markets should panic. Something this large cannot stay contained. For decades, that would have been true. But this time, it wasn't. If this had happened 10 years earlier, It would have sent shockwaves through the global economy. A major oil route collapsing, ships frozen in place, production shutting down. That kind of disruption used to mean one thing: panic. Prices would spike overnight. Markets would react instantly. Governments would scramble to respond. Not the world would feel it. It had to. Because for decades, that's exactly how the system worked. But this time, it didn't happen. There was movement. But not the kind anyone expected. Not panic, adjustment, quiet, fast, already in motion. And that's when the real shift became impossible to ignore. Because while one system was locking in place, another had already taken its place. Far from the choke point, out of sight, pipelines carrying oil through routes that barely existed years before. Tankers changing course, avoiding the corridor entirely. Suppliers stepping in before the gap could even widen. The oil didn't stop. It simply stopped needing this route. And that's the moment everything changes. Because the most important oil route on Earth was no longer essential. Not weakened, not damaged, replaced. The world didn't lose the route, and it outgrew it. And that is a very different kind of collapse. Because power built on control only exists when others depend on it. And the moment that dependence disappears, the power disappears with it. Not slowly, not over time, all at once. The threat that once shaped global decisions no longer carried weight. The leverage that once moved markets no longer forced reactions. The system that once held everything together was no longer needed. And the world didn't fight it.
The massive vessel remains entirely
didn't even
dormant,
acknowledge it.
yet the flow of
It simply
global
moved
trade
on.
continues uninterrupted.
And when the world moves on like this, the consequences don't stay outside. They come back. For millions of people, this didn't feel like a global shift. It felt like something smaller, something immediate. A worker shows up for a
No work
shift
today.
and is told, there's no work today. Not just today, until further notice. At first, it feels temporary, a delay, a bad week, something that will pass. It always feels that way in the beginning. But then it happens again, and again, and slowly, what felt temporary starts to feel permanent. Because when the system above you stops moving, everything below it begins to fail. Businesses slow first. Orders stop coming in. Payments stop going out. And then it gets worse, faster than anyone expected. Hours are cut, income drops, jobs disappear, not all at once, but fast enough that people begin to feel it in real time. Then prices begin to move. Fuel becomes harder to afford. Food follows. Basic things, things people never used to think about, become uncertain. And that's when the crisis changes. For many, it doesn't arrive all at once. It shows up quietly and then doesn't leave. A bill that's harder to pay, a purchase that has to wait, a decision that didn't exist before. And once those decisions start appearing, they don't go away. They multiply. Lines grow longer. Choices become fewer. Confidence disappears. And pressure begins to build. Not in markets, in homes. Because stability was never just about oil. It was about what oil made possible. Work, income, routine.
I swear they do this
Take
on
that
purpose.
away.
We've been sitting here for
And everything
3
else
hours
begins
now.
to shift with it. This wasn't just a crisis. It was something far more dangerous. Because nothing here was destroyed. The oil didn't disappear. The ships didn't vanish. The infrastructure was still there. But something else was gone. Something less visible. The belief that made it all work. For years, the idea was simple. Control the route, and you control the outcome. And for a long time, that idea shaped everything. Markets moved because of it. Decisions were made around it. Power was built on top of it. But it was never really about the route. It was about what people believed the route could do. That if it stopped, everything else would stop with it. And when the moment came to test that belief, it failed. The world didn't break. It adjusted. And that changed everything. Because the moment the world adapts, it stops depending. And the moment it stops depending, control disappears. Not slowly, not over time. Instantly. That was the real collapse. Not oil, not infrastructure. Dependence. And once dependence disappears, there's nothing left to control. The oil never disappeared. The system around it did. Out at sea, the image still remained. Ships that once moved without pause, now sitting still. Routes that once carried everything, now just lines on a map, not destroyed, not taken, left behind. Because the world didn't need to destroy it. It simply stopped needing it. And that is the kind of collapse history rarely prepares you for. Because it doesn't look like failure. It looks like something being quietly replaced, something becoming optional, something becoming irrelevant. And once something becomes irrelevant, it doesn't matter how powerful it once was. The world moves on, and it doesn't look back.